And so then we're arguing back and forth because I'm arguing strategy supported by systems and structure, and she's arguing organizational development. And then finally, you won the argument by saying, "Well, Dave, who comes up with the strategy?" I'm like, "Yeah, I guess it's the people." Okay, so then if we don't have the right people in place to have the strategy discussion and make the decision, I'm like, "All right, good, you won." Which is why you went back to school and got your master's in psychology after what, 2.5 decades or so in leadership. Is that about right?
Yeah, and it's funny because the more you work inside organizations, right? You look around and go, "There's more to what's going on here," right? It's
Yeah.
not just the processes and procedures, because the processes and procedures and the strategies that stick are the ones that, uh, whether it's management, whoever you want to call it, the ones that they're willing to stand behind.
Building projects requires technical expertise and resources. Building a construction business is about developing and aligning those capabilities with customers. We exist to help contractors build stronger businesses for the next generation. From startup to sustainability, contractors grow through 6 distinct stages. Each stage of growth requires a different leadership focus, strategies, systems, and structure. Our goal is to broadly share information that helps contractors navigate each stage. Any resources discussed are available on our website at dbmteam.com.
All right. So let's talk through stages of contractor growth, and we'll talk about floor ceilings and scaling. What that means, we'll kind of get into this as we start talking because I know you got plenty to say on this. And we're off. So and let me just try and go through, and I'll go through as I understand it, and then you can go through there and start. We'll tell stories. We'll describe how this, how we see this showing up with clients, with contractors in our own careers and things like that. But so
Okay.
think we're going to first talk through stages of growth. We'll probably get through that today, and we're going to kind of do this in a little loop-de-loop thing and come back to it over and over. But we'll go through stages of contractor growth because it's important to understand where a contractor's at within their growth cycle. Then we'll take a look at what we consider a basic business model for a contractor that'll help them see their business in a kind of simple diagrammatical way. Move to the talent value stream, which is really critical given today's environment, and
Right.
really not just today's environment, but really the last 5, 10 years and the next probably 15 years when it comes to talent in the construction industry. Come back around to making effective role transitions, right up and through retirement. And then we'll probably come back and start that'll give everybody a baseline understanding of those 4 components, how they go together into building a stronger contracting business. But today, mainly just want to hit the stages of growth, what they are, why they matter, the contractors and employment, just some stats from the industry. And so everybody can kind of understand what those range of contractors is. You and I started and ended our careers at very different points in that continuum. Why headcount really drives each stage, why it drives everything from strategy to management structure to systems to organizational development and the complexity of it. The leadership focus at each stage, and then getting into what you've described super well as floor ceilings and how you scale. And then some of the different development phases within each stage of growth. And that's pretty much what we'll cover today. Some of the resources we'll get out as a summary of those growth inflection points and a self-evaluation worksheet. And then future versions of this will hit the contractor business model, talent value stream, and role transitions. So I'm going to start with just going through as I describe the stages. So we kind of look at things in 6 different stages of growth. And this isn't meant to describe the whole of the market, but we'll get into that. And, stage 1 is starting up. Stage 2 is the basic foundation. 3 is refinement. 4 starts to create the scalable foundation for a contractor to grow. At 5, you're really ready to scale. And at 6, it's about being sustainable at 5 and really replicating that almost different business units. And each stage represents about a tripling of headcount, and we'll get into that in more details, from 5 to 15 people to 50, 150, 500, and then 15 plus. So, and each one of those starts to require very, obviously additional people, different skills, different systems, different tools for growth. A- Any comments on that? I mean, as you've seen now, lots of contractors of lots of different sizes throughout your career.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, right? Because when you work with the startups, right, everything's kind of back of the tailgate. You can do it all yourself. You can basically stand there and look at it all. And it's hard when you go even from the startup to the basic foundation, because suddenly you've got, that 15 people or the tripling of size where you don't have everybody on the same job site. You've got multiple job sites. You now have to figure out how to utilize, your people. And that's really the the first pinch point is when you get there. And it just gets bigger and bigger from there. And I think if people could visualize going from the 5 to the 15, and I look at it as kind of in an org structure kind of look. If they looked at it that way, you would see the growth from 5 to 15, 15 to 50, 50 to 150. Most people just don't look at it that way, right? So, yeah, just figuring out what that growth looks like is tough.
It was interesting yesterday. We saw we had a leadership team of a contractor assembled, and they're in that 500. They're kind of in between 5 and 6, and it was so funny because I'm looking around the room, and there was 22 people in the room just at the leadership team. It was a tier down from the executive team, and that was more people than they had in the entire overhead. Back 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when you're in the field, you don't really notice that you look up and you're like, what are all those people in the office? What are they doing?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's funny because if you start in a startup company or a basic foundation company, or even in the refinement side of a company, it is entirely different to grow it from, the stages here, the 2 to 3 to a 4, than it is to come in, be hired into, a 5 or a 6, because
Yeah.
they're just different animals when you walk into one as opposed to having to stretch one from one to the next.
So let's go through, and this will get into your career, my career a little bit. And I pulled some numbers. So this was kind of interesting. So out of the ENR Engineering News Record, they've got a list of the top 400 contractors, top 400 general and general engineering contractors, and the top 600 specialty contractors. Only about the top 50 on each of those lists had over 1,500 employees. And depending on the list that you pull and what metrics you look at, there's about 1 million contractors in the United States. So it's literally not even the 1%. It's the 0.01% have more than 1,500. So just to put it in context, most contractors are just quite simply not going to be at that range. And that's totally okay. A lot of that just has to do with time and strategy, opportunity, things like that. So it's about 9 million people employed in the construction industry, depending on the source and what all gets counted.
Yeah.
So I pulled some data. Axel has some general data on different contractors, different types of businesses, and they break up the ranges of headcount kind of like this. So it's pretty interesting when you start to look at how many construction businesses are just 1 to 4 employees, which we don't even start to count. That's really it's like the handyman that comes out and does work at our house or something. An excellent guy, but that's not that we don't even start to count at that size. We really start to count at that 5 and above range,
Right.
which only represents 40% of the market. But you can see it gets really, really small as you get down near the end of the 10,000 plus employees, which I believe in your background is about where you started, if I remember right.
Yeah, when I started in the industry, yeah, I mean, I walked into a company that had probably 10 to 15,000 ish when I started. 30 some years later, and some of that, a lot of it is self-perform. But a number of years later, it's 25 or 30,000. And so you walk into a contractor like that, and you don't get that overnight, right? That is over time. And in that over time, you see a org structure, you see what that looks like, you see that you have to have a repeatable process, you see that um, checklists are are indispensable. because you have to be able to do things from one person to the next. And the harder part in the big companies like that is the communication kind of laterally, right? The processes aren't the problem; they're there. It's making sure that everybody understands what they are. But yeah, it's different. You walk in and that's just what you know, right? I look at that as, for instance, safety even at home. I cannot watch somebody get on a chair with rollers on the bottom of it. It's like, get off of that chair. Go get a suitable ladder. What are you doing? I won't even lift a box that's too heavy for me. I'll go get some help because you don't want anybody hurt. Safety is a huge thing. And that was drilled into my head from day one. You get on the smaller side of things, and it's about, hey, we got to build this job. Not that safety's not important, it's just not ingrained the way that it had been for, generations of workers.
Yeah,
So,
you don't think about it the same.
yeah.
So in my, interestingly, so you started in the 0.004% of contractors, and then you grew from there. But you have a lot of experience, and we'll get into that. You have a lot of experience both then and now, obviously, with consulting, working with contractors of all sizes. So I started exactly the opposite end of that. So the first contractor I worked for, I was 15 years old. I was just doing some cleanup on a job site, just a friend of family type of thing. And the electrician out on the job site, who was a contractor, but he fell in that 1 to 4 headcount range, mostly the 1 to 2 headcount range. And he was a fantastic guy, but he was at that typical range at that size. He was very great technically. He saw me. I can't thank him enough. His name was Wayne, and I can't thank him enough because he started teaching me the trade, and he was a great teacher. He was a great electrician. He bought me my first set of tool bags. He treated me super well, and he's the one that helped me then get a job with a larger company, which was in the 10 to 19 size range. So I just, that was like 10x for me. That just seemed like the biggest company ever. And even though the owners, they didn't really, we had to go over to their house on Friday to pick up our paychecks, and then I moved from there to a company that was probably in the 100, plus, about the 100 headcount range at the time that I went to work there. And by the time I left and started the consulting business, we were, in the 300 to 500 person range. So it's been, kind of interesting seeing, as Sue and I, as we get into this, right, we're going to be talking about these things from two very different angles, and that's going to help everybody see the patterns and see what that looks like. And I did do a stint in my career where I worked for a really large company, Kavarner, and that it's just interesting. And it is very hard going from a smaller business, smaller being several hundred, to a huge business like that. It's very, very different. So anyhow, these are the numbers.
Yeah. Well, and it's different going the other way too, right? When you're inside an organization that has the checklists and the processes and the procedures and the just go look it up kind of thing.
Right.
It's hard to move into one that is at maybe 100 people, because they may not have all those. So you're like, well, where do I look this up? And they're going, look what up? So yeah, it's a whole different feel.
No, completely different. So as we get into this will be an interesting conversation. It'll be a theme throughout, as the floors and ceilings and even the differences between Sue and David. So now let's go through there where headcount. Why does headcount matter? And headcount matters because it drives about everything about the business. It drives the systems that are required, the management structure that's required. It drives the organizational development that's required, the opportunities, the strategies. And so one way to look at this is, almost just very simply look at your peak headcount over about a 2-month period of time. So look back last year, forecast forward. That's what you have to be designing your organization around. Now, there's some variables that go with that. We talk through those in the self-evaluation tool for the inflection points, but complexity of business matters. For instance, if you're doing a single trade or single scope of work like concrete, and you're doing it primarily all in one geographical location for a particular type of market sector, then you can have a much higher headcount with much less complex, complexity within your management structure and within your systems. On the other hand, if you're in multiple geographic locations and you have a fully integrated business with design and engineering services and manufacturing and several integrated businesses related to that, you might have a lower headcount but a higher complexity requirement for management structure, processes, systems. Any comments on this piece right here?
Well, probably the biggest comment is I do like you kind of look at that kind of 2-month peak headcount. Most people look at, well, I'm fine right where I'm at, but they look at it at the probably least confusing time of the year, right? It's like if I don't know, if you have to have your appendix out, that's not the time you want to decide which hospital you want to go to, right? You want to have done the research ahead of time and know where you want to go to get that done. So you want to do it in a time of calm. And here we tend to want to do things in a time of calm without looking at when in most cases, it feels like the chaos is happening in, June, July, August, certainly for the heavy civil people, where, you're making hay while the sun shines, but you're not really looking at your structure and your systems. You might be feeling the stress of them, but then it calms down over, the winter months, and you're like, oh yeah, see, it's fine. It's like, well, it might be fine now, but just remember, you got to go back and look where you were and when the stress points were. And sometimes we forget to grab those times and try to remember that the chaotic feel, right, that went
Right.
with it, because that's when you find out whether your systems are really, and your structure is really good. Did it break then, or was it about to break, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. So last week we had, and everybody's running into these problems now, I think, with major jobs pushing just because of supply chain issues and things like that. So they had what they thought was a pretty level backlog and a curve that looked about like this. And they had 4 really large jobs push, and of course, start dates push, but completion dates don't usually push. That's just the nature of what the project owner wants or needs out of it. And so there may be acceleration, payments or anything like that, but it doesn't change the fact that they went through it. I think they're going to burn off like a crazy number, like 75% of the work that they planned over a 12-month period. They're going to do it over a 5-month period.
Right.
And that creates all kinds of stress, and that's kind of a lull before the storm. And so the CEO is just going, oh man, I can't wait to get through the next 5 months. And I'm sitting there going, well, cool, but let's look forward. The next 5 months is actually going to be our normal, based on our plans and what we want to do strategy wise. That's our new normal 3 years from now. And I kind of hate the term new normal with COVID and everything, but that's a way to look at it. So as they're going into this, they can't look at it like, oh, I hope I get past the next 5 months. They have to look at it and say, what's breaking with our people, our systems, our strategies, and our tools, our equipment, all of those things, what's breaking, so that they can put all the effort into putting the right structure, the scaffolding in place, so to speak, around all that, so that 3 years from now that becomes just easy. That becomes the new normal.
Yeah, well, that's why the plans for growth are so important, because if you do just look at it as, hey, I've got this hill to get over, that's one thing. But yeah, if that hill is just your new base camp, then yeah, you got to look at it in an entirely different way to get there. And a lot of times, when we look at jobs individually, we don't necessarily see all the things that can happen when they all get scheduled together, right? I imagine in the meeting the other day, the CFO of that company is probably running around going, "Uh-oh, we better redo some cash flows here, because we've got all 5 of these starting at the same time, which is great, but the cash flow is going to be strapped for what could be
Yep.
4 to 8 or 10 weeks." And that could be a make or break that wasn't going to be a make or break 6 months ago.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a good point. That, yeah, what the CFO was running around doing was actually getting. Glad you brought that up. Yeah, they were running around and focused on had to double their line of credit.
Yeah.
They had to, talk to their bonding company and work through that. And they had to do that while they were showing financials that showed horrible financial performance during the first half of their fiscal
Yeah.
year
Yeah.
because these jobs pushed. And
Yep.
it had nothing to do with any of the fundamentals of the business. Everything was running as it should. It's just that, if you have that much work push out 6 months, it just hurts really, really bad. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that's the thing. You've got to understand the things that you can control, and then just manage around the things that you can't, right? If an owner says, I'm going to push this out 60 days or 6 months, you can't control that. Maybe with through some
yeah,
talks and helping them find some, better financing or something. But you can't necessarily control that. But you can control the talk you're having with the bonding company. You can control the talk you're having with the bank.
right.
You can do all of those things in preparation, and hopefully put that down, put it down on a piece of paper so that if it ever happens again, and it will, what were the things you did, and now just go back to the list and look at it again and continually update that list, so you've got a regular, again, process that you can go through every time that happens.
So next, I want to hit probably two examples of what the same activity looks like at three different stages of growth. So as we dive into that, maybe that'll help explain some things. So I think the first step is project management, just the both the function of project management and the role, because those are two different things. When you're small, it's really not even a role. When you're small, it's likely the owner is handling all of it, and there's very little project management requirements just due to the nature and the size of the projects. And then let's say at that scalable foundation size, around 150 people, that's the stage where we call it scalable foundation, because you, for the major functions in the company, which is usually the get work, the estimating function, the project management function, and accounting, you start to have some pretty clear expectations for what the PMs need to do, but they still have very little support. They're generalists and they're doing a little bit of everything. They're doing some estimating, they're doing some purchasing, and they have some systems and tools, but the use is totally inconsistent. So that's normal. That's exactly what they should be doing at that stage. And when you move over to stage 6+, you've now taken that project management function and you've broken it down into somewhere between 4 to 6 very distinct roles, from project executive through project engineer, project coordinator level, people. They make up the total project management function. They have clear career paths and training for each role. That a lot of that training involves cross training for other roles. So that management trainee program will include 6 months in estimating or a year in estimating to learn those skills and learn how everything integrates. They have really robust support functions, coming from estimating, purchasing, contracts, virtual construction, fabrication. And so it's really narrowed the scope of what the PM is expected to do, and at the same time specialized it into multiple roles. And then they have both clear outcome and process expectations, not just what's expected for them to achieve, but how they're expected to achieve it. As you mentioned, the checklist. Anybody doesn't know, Sue is a checklist queen. She loves checklists. Don't ever mistake a checklist from an action item list in front of Sue. It's not a good look. But this is the progression that's going on, and it's interesting. We have several clients right now that are going through specifically with the PMs and adding in centralized purchasing, and that's something that usually happens in between stage 4 and 5. And that's not a hard and fast rule. Some companies might have integrated that function earlier. A lot of that just depends on the dynamics of the business and the leadership. But many times it happens for between stage 4 and 5 that they centralize, how that buyout and how that procurement is happening. And it's super interesting to watch. If you watch a project, like I came from a company that had done centralized purchasing starting very early. So to me, I didn't know anything else. That was a shock to me when I got out and started consulting in 2005 and realizing how many contractors didn't have that. So I never knew anything besides calling somebody up and saying, hey, I need X, Y, and Z. They knew what the requirements on the job were. They knew the specs. They knew that, what was approved from a submittal standpoint, and it just magically showed up. And I think that's the coolest thing ever as a project manager or a superintendent. And it's so interesting because then I'm realizing that you get into a company, where the project manager, the superintendent are directly responsible for ordering the material, including the vendor management and all aspects of it. And they look at it like it's not a benefit to have, a purchasing, agent. They look at it like, why would you take that control from me? I need that control to run the job. So this gets into our first floor and ceiling. So what have you seen within the project management function now within your career, Sue?
Well, it's very interesting because the before consulting, right? When I was actually, working for a general or a prime contractor, it's funny, right? As a 6+, right? Big company. Uh, Funny thing there, we did not have centralized purchasing. And I tell you, tough trying to, it's tough trying to change a culture that when you look at, you look at this 6+, right? And the sustainable scaling, that is, the project manager is responsible for basically everything on that job. And those uh, distinct roles that have been, project engineer, field engineer, all these roles that work and report up through the project manager. When you talk about purchasing, that purchasing was always done on the job. When you've structured it that long or that way for so long, and now you try to implement a centralized purchasing module, it can get a little crazy because, again, it is exactly like you said, David. It is project manager wondering, how can you take this control away from me? Even though central purchasing in this case, right, can save a lot of money, things like that. And you do have to plan ahead for things like that. Yet some of the projects I'd worked around, we had to plan 4, 5, 6 months in advance to package up barges to send them to Alaska. And you had to package them in such a way that the right things would come off at the right time. So it's not like planning and scheduling wasn't our thing, but it was that loss of control. So it is interesting going from that, the startup in one, because now consulting and working with some of those smaller kind of startup type companies, it's difficult to go from a 1 to a 4, right? To go from that starting up to that scalable foundation, because you're used to having the purchase order book in your pocket. You're used to knowing every dollar that goes out the door, and you measure things in dollars and cents. As you move up to that 4 and you become scalable, you start to round, right? You start rounding to the nearest thousand, maybe the nearest 10,000. And
Right.
you're getting to the fives and sixes, and now you're rounding to the nearest million. So that it just kind of again explains the level of changes. But you're right. In the scalable foundation, that project manager kind of does everything, knows everything, and can ask all the questions because they pretty much know everything that's going on. When you start to get on that bigger work and you start to get with those bigger organizations, you really do have to trust the people below you. And that, it's a different skill level. It's a different skill level going from, through a level 4 where you're doing it all yourself. You're doing a lot, but doing it all yourself, to that 5 or 6 where now you're not doing it yourself. You're doing it through others who are doing that work. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's a whole different, a whole different skill that needs to be taught and figured out if this is what somebody really, really wants to do.
So I was using the analogy the other day with somebody on, it's kind of like the difference between basketball is basketball, except you train very differently. If I'm training to, this is a horrible analogy for you and me. So, because I don't even like basketball and I'm definitely no good at it. I don't know about you, but if we're training for a one-on-one game, it's still dribbling, shooting, blocking. It's all of the basics, but we would train much differently to play one-on-one versus playing as a team, because as a team, you have to play so much and passing the ball around and having that perfect situational awareness to simply know that okay, if I'm in this position and the rest of the people are here, I know that I've got 3 or 4 teammates that are behind me. And if I just throw the ball, they will retrieve it and they will, they're going to run their play exactly as they should. And that's a very different training, when you get down to it, because it comes down to the handoff. So I think, the important piece, and there's 100 of these different, this is probably the beginning of our floors and ceilings and all of that discussion. And there's 100 different growth points that you go through as a contractor. We're just giving an example of the project management. And it's important to look at it and go, each one of these, each level of structure is totally appropriate for the stage of growth. You couldn't take the 6+ structure and bolt it onto a number 2, size company.
Right.
You can do something slightly out of order, like you might centralize purchasing, much earlier in the process. But even with the centralized purchasing, let's say you get into that scalable foundation and you've centralized purchasing, everything else the PM is doing is still, it's very much a generalist role. It's single accountability. It's pretty simple. There's a lot of inconsistencies and things like that. So you're always progressing towards specialization and towards consistency is what you're progressing towards. So let's hit one more example of foreman, out on the job, short interval planning. That's your, different companies, anywhere from a 1-week look ahead to a 3-week look ahead schedule. And this is where the action really happens. I mean, most of productivity happens on that short interval plan and the ability to actually get the task done that we plan to get done. So when you're starting up, that's pretty much like, what is that? Projects likely don't require one. If the owner of that company came from a larger organization and started up, they may actually use that tool on the projects. That looks very different. Whether somebody came from a higher level role at a larger company and then started the business, or somebody took, what I call like the craftsman route and was, a great carpenter or a great electrician or, plumber, and then started up their business from there, just coming straight out of the field. Those two startups look a little bit different, but likely the projects you're working on, they just simply don't require one, and you got it all in your head. So then you get up to that scalable foundation, the 150 person range, and there's definitely clear expectations. At this point, we've realized all the problems. Foreman's got to do the short interval plan. The foreman, and they use it a lot of times to communicate their field workforce needs on the project to their supervisor, be that depending on how they're structured, a superintendent or a ops manager, or just directly to the project manager. And that's primarily where the tool is used. It's very inconsistent in the use of formats. What was the last time? What was that company? How many formats did they find when we finally started to get to standardizing this? What do you find? Like 15 different formats across the company, and that was only for one scope of work. they did like 3 or 4 different scopes of work, and just within the one scope of work, there was a bunch of different formats of short interval plans.
Yeah.
So it gets back to the inconsistent use. And that's not just on the formats. Then there's also the workflow of where does that tool go and how's it used for feedback.
Right.
So then you get all the way over to kind of the 6+, and they, usually at that stage, they're tasking the project in the very beginning at the planning phase. So the tasks are already predetermined. Those tasks happen to be tied to the estimate in terms of cost, budget, schedule, all that. They're tied into the virtual construction or any design support required, purchasing, fabrication. It's kind of cool. So you start the project, you got a big long task list and everything. So now it's a matter of just sequencing those tasks based on what's required. Material lead times and labor are roughly aligned at that early planning stage before boots ever touch the ground with the project schedule. And then they have, it's fully integrated with a field labor dispatch system or an equipment dispatch system, depending on the contractor, and production feedback system. And there's a weekly review and escalation process. So you actually have, the foreman's manager looking at the weekly plan, going, okay, this is the plan, challenging them, asking the different questions, making sure it's good, looking at it afterwards and saying, did we get done what we said we were going to get done? Clear escalation process if the work's interrupted, work areas aren't ready, waiting on other trades, anything like that. So that's a pretty dramatic difference between a 1 and a 6. So, and I know early on, so this is also a funny piece, is early on with the consulting business, in, so going back to 2005, 2006, one of the very first training modules we developed was labor productivity. And it was interesting because we were in a few workshops where there would be some Kiewit employees in there, and it was so interesting watching the difference in the room, because you start to talk about task planning and having all your prerequisites met and everything like that, and you have literally a whole class full of people. And I was noticing this, and this is before I'd done some sub work for Kiewit, this way before meeting you. And the rest of the class is sitting there taking notes viciously. And some people, there's always like the two or three, they're like, why do you need to plan? The world just happens. And then there's like the middle of the class that's taking notes and really thinking about it. And then the people from Kiewit or that had come from Kiewit are looking at going, why would you ever start a task if you didn't have everything ready? I'm like, you're a useless teacher.
Yeah. Well, but you're right? That is really when we go back to the very beginning of this, right? Talking about the size of the organizations and talking about just what the organization has done for so long. I tell you that with me, right? Again, the Kiewit people that totally understand how to put a schedule together, what that schedule should look like. You need to include your subcontractors on that schedule. That also means you need to make sure that they've got their proof of insurance, that everything that's there, your equipment, any equipment you're going to take out for maintenance during the week. What does that mean? How do you get something else in there? But I mean, all of that is thought through on a very large wall in the conference room, or several walls in the conference room. But it is literally the culture of doing that. And again, so moving from that 6+ contractor and knowing that you've got all that, and going to someone who is trying to grow to something like that, right? But that might be a stage 3 or stage 4. There's a lot of backing up you have to do, because you can't just implement all these, like you said, taking the 6+ processes and try to bolt them onto a 3, that 3 size contractor just doesn't work. There's training that has to go with that. There's a bit of a culture change. There's literal behavioral management that needs to happen to be able to put that in, because people have to understand that this is the new way, and this is what you're going to do and going to continue to do. Um, and it's hard. And back to the safety discussion we were having a little earlier. I'm used to walking on a job and everything is in its place. I mean, everything is in its place. There's not a piece of trash on the ground. And well, you remember we were on a job site tour
Yeah.
together, and walked out there, and there were a bunch of cords laying on the ground.
Thought
And
you were going to have cardiac arrest on the spot.
I got to the top of the stairs and looked at it. I was almost paralyzed. I almost couldn't move. I'm like, what do you do with all these cords on the ground? Somebody's going to get hurt. And it took me a minute. Actually, it took David, you explaining it to me that, yeah, my floor was so high on safety. I couldn't even imagine that this was okay. And yet for the contractor that was out there, this was great. They had really cleaned things up. And this was 100% better than it had been a couple of months ago. And so just the the difference between what my expectation is when I go out there and someone else's expectation that maybe hasn't lived the life that I lived. It's sometimes it's tough to realize, hey, you do have to meet people where they are and help them to see beyond that. But yeah,
and for context, that was a job that was a 20-story, building.
Yeah.
There was probably, peak headcount out there in the 500-ish person range for all trades. It from my experience, kind of looking up the mountain, it looked like a pretty darn clean job site. I mean, it wasn't perfect. And yet you were having a complete, like, oh no, they could do this and they could do this and they could do this. Your situational awareness of the details that you saw as compared to what I saw, what our client was seeing, were just completely different. And so it was a perfect example of floors and ceilings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in this one, this is an interesting one that I like this example of short interval planning, because unlike what we just went through with the project management function, this is one that a lot of elements of this these kind of best practices that are in this 6+ size contractor can be pulled all the way back to a much smaller contractor, to somebody even in the 3 or 4 range. Maybe not the whole of the integrated technology systems, but in terms of just how to work through this process. And because this is such a crucial process, and to give an example of it, this is a whole foundation of like the Lean Construction Institute, is that they did studies of short interval plans, and they found that a typical project for any typical specialty contractor, their weekly work plan, only about half the activities happened as planned, not because the particular specialty contractor wasn't doing their job, just because the work area wasn't ready, or labor wasn't available, or material wasn't available. Something occurred, doesn't matter what it was, but they only accomplished about 54% of the task as they planned them for the week. Doesn't mean they weren't busy for the week or anything, just they didn't do it as planned. And then if they only focused on that one metric of just making sure that the weekly work plan happened as best possible, the way it was planned, you're always going to have rain days and things like that. Once it got into the 85% or above range as an average for the week, the projects as a whole performed dramatically better on all aspects, from quality to safety to overall project duration to profitability. So this gets me back to, after my recognition in 2006, 2007, of doing a lot of labor productivity workshops, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and then watching the difference between the younger project engineers, project managers, foremen, superintendents that were in those classes, that came from companies that like Keywood, or you guys have a kind of a lineage of some other contractors that you spawned and things like that, and seeing how they thought dramatically different about project planning and task planning. Then I think I was probably 2008, 2009. I'm in Las Vegas. I'm at an industry conference, and I'm doing that same labor productivity workshop. And I was just kind of going around the room, and everybody introduce yourself. And about the third or fourth guy that introduced himself, he made some pretty derogatory comment about, I'm on this stupid, and I'm not going to use any of the other words that he used, but I think it was a water treatment plant with Kiewit, and they forced me to do this and this and this paperwork, and he's and they do this and they do that, and he was basically talking about the bureaucratic business management system that they had in place, which that's what now I know, knowing you, that was within your region that you were responsible for. So you were the business manager, you were forcing these bureaucratic processes. So I'm going, and then I hear 3 or 4 other contractors throughout the room. I think there's probably 60, 80 people in the room. They started to pipe up, and I'm going, wow, it's like 7 minutes into this class, I've already lost control. I haven't even started. I'm on the intro slide. And so then I asked the one question that I was hoping we'd do. Well, how's the project going? Oh, project's going great. It's ahead of schedule. How are you doing on the project? Oh, we're making plenty of money. We're doing great.
Yeah.
So, but it was funny because I want to, I want to say they were in the 50-ish person range. So they were in that, stage 3, probably emerging from stage 2. And he didn't fully understand it, but you had an overall subcontractor management system where you enforce some of those basic processes and procedures down about planning and safety and quality control and such. And it was interesting that he kind of paused and he thought about it, and then at least he was quiet for the rest of the class, and I was able to get through it. But it was just interesting. And I always wonder if I could go back, did he really pull in the cause and effect of that? Or not. So I'm super interested to hear, later on about how you drove some of those processes down to really manage the subcontractors and therefore help pull them up and help grow them over time.
Right.
But
yeah. And that is one reason, right? When a lot of people say, hey, the generals tend to hire the same subs. It's like, well, the ones that understand what you're doing just make life that much easier, right? If you're going to do the processes that you've done before and you get it, makes it that much easier for the prime's life.
Yeah. So, and again, this is the same thing. Every level of system, totally appropriate for the stage of growth. It's knowing, an objective evaluation of where you happen to be at in your stage of growth, where you're growing towards, and where your systems and your structures and everything happen to be. So this is not a one size fits all. So now let's talk through leadership focus and those changes. And I like the analogy of, it's like water. Water has a wide range of temperatures, anywhere from 33 degrees to 211 degrees, and it's still water. But at 212 degrees, it becomes steam, and at 32 degrees, it becomes ice. And so it's almost the way to look at each of these levels of growth and stages of growth, is that there's a wide range of within each one, but at some point you kind of have to cross over this line, and you have to say, I'm going to go from ice to water, I'm going to go from water to steam. And so and these are just super sound bites. We'll get through them really quick, and then we'll talk about them. But really at stage one, and this is in that startup stage, you have to know what needs to be done. If you're trying to build something, you have to know how to build it, and then you have to find a customer that's going to pay you for it. It is that's simple. That's the basis of all businesses. That's where a Bechtel starts. That's where any ABC construction starts. So then you get to stage two, and now we're in this 15-person range, and so you've got, and it seems kind of funny. I mean, depending on where you're at in a stage of growth, you can look back and go, well, 15, that's not very many people, but that's a really hard stage. You've got to go through there and trust somebody else to be that expert on site and build the project the way that you would build it, to take care of your customer. The quality is there. You're trusting, safety, and you don't have a safety program. You don't have a safety director. So you're trusting this person that's out there running the project to go do it. And that's incredibly hard to do. You're probably starting to let go at this point in time of some of the accounting functions and trust that that's getting done. But at the same time, you have to actually understand what's going on, because you actually need the banking relationships, and you're probably getting your first line of credit around this point in time. And they're starting to ask you more questions, because it's just past that credit card, line of credit where you just sign your name for it and they do a personal credit check. Now they're asking for your financials and things like your work in progress report or something like that. And you're learning a bunch of new things, but yet you have to rely and trust somebody else. So kind of stage three, in that 50-person range, you have to learn how to, now you may have probably 2 project managers, an estimator, and you have to learn how to manage them to produce really consistent outcomes given all the inconsistencies. Customers are inconsistent, projects, suppliers, people, the environment, just the weather is inconsistent. And you have to learn how to manage people and get consistent outcomes despite all those inconsistencies. You got more handoffs to work through. So now you start to get into stage 4, 150 plus people. You're starting to really align these people and these functions. Like we talked about, probably those primary functions, depending on the company, is project management, estimating, and accounting are the 3 primary things you're working to integrate. And getting the people, processes, tools across the whole company. You're starting to see that flow, the handoffs between estimating and project management. Those are, by the way, never ever perfect, but this is a stage 4 is about where you start to really intentionally think about that handoff and start to put systems in place for it. So at 5, you've got those things happening, and now you're starting to align the team around very common vision and values and long-term strategies that are required for sustainable growth. The same type of work that sustained you at stage 2 definitely is not going to sustain you at stage 5. And then you're really starting to systematize your talent pipeline for key functions. So now you're really starting to think about, how do we develop a project manager, not hire a project manager, not battlefield promote a project manager, but literally build them from scratch, whether that's bringing somebody out of the field or out of a college program, and then starting to develop them into your company and teach them what's going on. And stage 6 is where your leadership focus changes, and now you're about sustaining the business, or businesses, including the governance structure, probably a board of advisors, your strategy, succession, scalability in all conditions, and everything is just becoming more systematic rather than task oriented at this stage in time. And you've delegated, again, you still have people that have leadership focus at level 5 and level 4 and level 3 and level 2 all throughout your organization, but these are delegated down. So that's a lot, but those changes occur at each stage. So that's really what we're going to talk through next. Anything you want to add to this one before we move on to the growth through those stages?
Well, I think the thing that really threads through all of them, I mean, there's many things, but certainly when we talk about like in stage 5, right, that systematizing the talent pipeline for people coming in, we just have to remember that those people, no matter who you are, there's going to be training through all 6 of these stages, right? Even a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company probably needs training on the new functions of the iPhone. So
Right.
there's training that happens at every one of these stages. Uh, there's professional development. We don't necessarily call it that all the time, but professional development, that deep development at the level you're at. That happens a lot in, stage 1, right? You know deeply what it is you're trying to do. And then the other one is that leadership kind of look at things, and how do you help people to see what that next step might look like, right? So as they're, you get to that level 2, that teaching and trusting, right? That's more of a leadership focus again than it is of a professional development focus. So those things will be flowing in and out of this the whole entire time, but don't think training goes away just because the company's gotten really, really big, right? It's
Yeah,
training.
that's a great point. So let's get to this point where you and I have argued over the years. So I started my career. I came up through the field. So to me, I'm at that stage 1. I know what needs to be done and how to do it. I'm an electrician by training. I can make the lights come on. And so then as I progressed up through my career and, leading up to starting the consulting business, you work up and it's processes and it's structure and it's a lot of those things. So first starting the consulting business, I was very heavily focused on if you have the processes in place and you have the structure in place, then a lot of other things work out. And then you start to see the advantage that strategy, really plays, especially when you get into those higher levels of 5 and 6, and the strategies of working, upstream with the customers, working directly with the project owners, getting involved with large programs, the large construction programs early in the programming stage of it, and getting involved at that level. And so then I started to switch. I'm going, okay, well, it's not just processes and structure, it's a strategy. That must be it. And then Sue comes along and she's talking about organizational development, and which is training and development. And organizational development is the broad term. We can unpack that more, but the broad term for all of the training and development and very intentional ways of bringing people through the entire organization up through their retirement masterpiece. And so then we're arguing back and forth because I'm arguing strategy supported by systems and structure, and she's arguing organizational development. And then finally, you won the argument by saying, "Well, Dave, who comes up with the strategy?" I'm like, "Yeah, I guess it's the people." Okay, so then if we don't have the right people in place to have the strategy discussion and make the decision, I'm like, "All right, good, you won." Which is why you went back to school and got your master's in psychology after what, 2.5 decades or so in leadership. Is that about right?
Yeah, and it's funny because the more you work inside organizations, right? You look around and go, there's more to what's going on here, right? It's
Yeah.
not just the processes and procedures, because the processes and procedures and the strategies that stick are the ones that uh whether it's management, whoever you want to call it, the ones that they're willing to stand behind. So the ones that the people push are the ones that other people do. So it's like, it is all about the people, and how they sit and how they behave and what their behavior means to the rest of the organization.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So I guess I love how you approach things. We got to the similar spots in very different ways, but that argument was fun. And then now you see how that's playing out, because really over the next 15, it's going to be probably 15 plus years before we start to reverse the trend just in demographics that we have for the retiring baby boomers, which is really what you're saying is the retirement of people in the 45 to 65-year-old age range that have had enough experience and made all the mistakes they need to make to know what needs to be done and still have enough runway to go do it. And we just have a dearth of those people for the next, until, like, I didn't want to say 2030 before the demographics even start to turn around. And that's just at the age range aspect, never mind attracting them to the industry and getting them the experience. So So, anyways, that's you'll hear that theme. You want to take this one and describe how you see this?
Well, yeah. So we talked a little bit about it with that whole safety conversation, right? Um, there are, if you look at organizations like buildings, right? Every single building has to start with that foundation, right? If you don't have a foundation, you can't get to the first floor, second floor, third floor, right? There's nowhere to grow if you don't have some place to put that. And all organizations are going to need to start there. All organizations, again, are going to start small. They're going to start with the one person, the 5 people, up to the 15 people, and they're going to just like the last slide talked about, right? There's the that level 2, that teaching and that trusting, right? You've got to know that your foundation was right before you go out there and try to put a second or another floor on top of that, right? And when you get there, every floor, right, has a floor, or every, I guess, level of a building has a floor and a ceiling. We see it all the time. I know, David, you do too, that we'll walk into helping a contractor, and their floor is, or maybe I should say, my floor when I'm talking to them, my floor is something much higher than maybe what their ceiling is. Again, that safety conversation, right? My floor was, you can't be doing any of this stuff. The cords on the ground, all of those things are not just safety violations, but they're going to hurt somebody. I went down the whole tragic road there. Um, and I was on probably the 6th floor, and that was my floor of that level. They were on maybe the first level of the building, and their ceiling was, this is great, right? They just haven't grown up into or grown past some of the issues that it can cause. But everything has a high and a low of that, right? We've been talking as well about the things that work on that first level don't necessarily work on the third level. As contractors grow from that $1 million to the 3 million to the 10 million, just like the 5 person to the 15 person to the 50 person, you can't just bolt these things on as you go along, or go think you can bolt things on beyond you and bring them back, right? Uh, the You have to remember that your floor on the third level, right, is the ceiling of the second level. So you've already worked beyond that ceiling, and now you've got to look at, what do your people needs look like? What do your purchasing needs look like? There's so many things that are different. Again, going from a 10 million to a $30 million book of business, right? That's 3 times the size. Your systems won't be the same. Your people won't be the same. The level of people doing the work and those that you have to teach and trust to do the work are going to look different. Your org structure is going to expand as you work through that. So,
The expectations from your customers will change.
oh, absolutely. Yeah. Your customers are bigger, more sophisticated. They're expecting things. Again, if you used to be a $10 million, book of business kind of contractor, and you're now in the $30 million range, what you used to do in maybe $1 million increments, you're now doing in 3, 4, $5 million increments. The expectation from, heck, your neighbors, your community may be different. Certainly, the expectations from your owners and the subcontractors that you're going to hire are going to be different. So as things grow, and you move from that first level, second level, third level, and then again you start that 4th to 5th level, and now you've got that where now you're trying to scale it from this one building that you're in to multiple buildings in multiple cities, in multiple states, right? You're
Right.
now trying to replicate that around, in that case, kind of geographically replicating everything in each of the areas. So
Yeah, I love that you brought up the subcontractor piece. Because we talked about the subcontractor piece as in a sub working for like your company, a very very large organization. I'm going to go on the reverse side of that. I was having lunch the other day with a general contractor, friend of mine, and I've known him since they had about a $20 million business with 30, 40 people, and now they're in the $100 million size. And it's interesting because you're right, they had to change out some subcontractors, and they had a few that when we were talking to them at the $20 million size, that they said, oh, we want to work, and they had certain subs in town that they wanted to go work with. They just didn't have any work that was appealing enough for those subs or anything. So now what was kind of cool then is, now many years later, and now they're doing projects, and they had one of those subs on the job, and then they were talking about how much they were learning from the subcontractor, because even though the relationship was like this, the subcontractor is a dramatically larger organization and in sophistication. And so the owner's going, wow, it's fantastic. I appreciate their professionalism. We're learning a lot from it. It was kind of funny just listening to the description. And so those relationships then will level up their team, and then they'll keep leveling up floors and ceilings.
yeah. Well, and then when you hire, again, as a prime, and you hire a subcontractor, you don't want to break them, right? You need to know what their floors and ceilings are. I was always typically on heavy civil work, and we had a lot of road work, and I know a company now, right? A traffic control company, the great company. They get nothing but rave reviews everywhere. But a contractor that wants them to continue to work for him wants them to be bigger. And they are at they're literally at a ceiling right now. And they have to determine how they're going to scale. What are they going to do? Are they going to buy more trucks? That's not the problem. Their problem is, how are they going to put the correct foreman on those new trucks with new people?
Right.
Even though the contractor is growing, the subcontractor is growing at a different pace. And you don't want to throw too much work their way, because you don't want to break them. So their floors and ceilings look a little bit different, and how they scale is by truck, as opposed to by geographical region for larger contractors. So.
That's an interesting point that you bring up, and that is a thought, because you do feel constrained, right? When you're growing a business, you feel constrained in every way. You are constrained by your capital, you're constrained by your customers, by your people, and if you mistake that. I remember one of our clients, and one of the owners was just going, man, I just wish we had more capital, because they've got all these ideas, and they're thinking that if we just had more capital, we could go do all these things. And it's the speed at which you can develop the people. Okay, I guess I'm saying you're right again. The organizational development that's required to go develop the people. And that's what I kept asking, like, what would you do if you had an extra $3 million of working capital? What exactly would you do? You're obviously building the work. You don't need it for that. What would you do? And they couldn't come up with a good answer, but it is that feeling of like, oh, I'll just buy more trucks. I'll buy this, I'll buy that. And every time we've seen that injection, which we've seen a lot of bad investments made, where capital is injected into the business, and it's more than what the team is actually capable of managing, which right. Seems kind of weird. And you can go out and you can buy a lot of things, including buying people that you think you're buying a resume. But if you don't have it integrated well into the organization, that still doesn't mean you can progress through these different stages.
Right. If you go and buy a person, right, because they're coming in with a great resume, they may be working, mentally speaking, they're working on the sixth story of this building, and yet your organization is only on the third story, and right. they cannot pull you up like that. So yeah, it's knowing where they fit when they come in, and what gain will they bring, and how can you orient the rest of the organization around that, because you can't scale from a 3 to a 6, not overnight.
Yeah. No,
not easily.
So that kind of tees us up to the next piece of just a way to look at through each stage of growth, whether it's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. The teams as we would look at it in a very simplistic way, and we're going to unpack this a little bit, go through kind of the ABCs of development. So you kind of have stage 1A, 1B, 1C, and this is a handy way of looking at it, where they're going from emerging, just kind of popping my head up, and I'm looking, and I start to see the floor, to where it's hollow, and then the team's a bit hollow, and then it becomes what we consider, okay, you're ready to move to the next stage and this full stack. So let's talk through these a little bit and give some examples, and then we'll be wrapping this up in a minute. So at the emerging stage, both the top leader and the management team all need to develop comfortable capabilities. So, and let's unpack that term a little bit. Comfortable capabilities, all high performers want to talk about peak capabilities. Like, that sounds really, really good. Like, after we're done here, I'm going to go out for a run. No, peak capabilities is literally that. I can run at my peak pace for maybe 400 meters before my heart's in zone 5, and my legs are giving out and all those things. So you don't want to ever design a system that requires peak performance. Great to know that you have it. Great to know that that's a stretch and a possibility. But if you're building a business, you need to go focus on people's comfortable capabilities, both systems, equipment, things like that. Because if you overstress it, it'll get there. So comfortable capabilities and capacity and systems for their current stage of growth. And then if they're emerging, it's really important to say, what headcount range was everyone comfortably capable, and just kind of back up to that. And that's just an evaluation tool, so that there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you can apply that to physical performance or anything. At hollow is when the top leader is comfortable, the top leader of the organization, owner, CEO, president, however you want to look at it, the top leader is comfortable in capabilities and capacity at the current stage of growth, with strong desire and aptitude for the next stage of growth. And you can look at that top leader at both the overall company level, or as you grow, that top leader in charge of project management, that top leader in charge of each functional area, in charge of accounting, so on and so forth. But there's big gaps in everything from desires to aptitudes, and separating out aptitudes and capabilities, just for quick definition. An aptitude is that I might have an ability to run faster than I can currently run. I'm not sure that that's true, but in case of my running, but I might have the physical aptitude to do that. I'm definitely not in peak condition or anything. And then capabilities are what I'm currently capable of doing, and capacity is how much of that thing I can go do. So think about, if you went to the running analogy, a pace and a distance in one or more roles below that leader, and including unfilled roles. So there may be roles that are completely unfilled at a hollow organization. There's also really likely gaps in the systems required for the next stage of growth. So hollow is really defined, by moving into that stage. So once the team is ready, now if you can imagine people climbing a mountain, which we'll talk about next, now the entire team is together. There's still a hierarchy and everything, but the entire team is generally ready. They're comfortably executing that current stage of growth, and they have a strong desire and aptitude for the next stage of growth. So that's how we kind of define these three: emerging, hollow, and ready. And again, they're not perfect. Systems also at that ready stage are at least comfortable at the current stage of growth. Like, I remember one stage of growth we went through as a contractor, and this is kind of funny looking back on it now, but we went to actually go enter a cash receipt into the accounting system, and it wouldn't take all the digits for $1 million check. and it's kind of funny when you think about that now. It just depends on where you're at. I mean, so if you're growing business, $1 million might seem like a huge revenue number, much less a monthly check from a single job. And on the other hand, if you're, at stage, 5 or 6, you're getting $1 million checks all the time, and some much larger than that. So it was just kind of funny where we're like, okay, system's broke. We need to go shopping. And converting your accounting system is a really, really hard thing to go do, especially when you don't really know and you don't have all the capabilities of it. So this is where it's really important to have, an objective foundation, or objective evaluation. That's the foundation of any improvement roadmap. You trying to make improvements without knowing what stage of growth you happen to be at, where you're heading in the future, where your team and where your systems are at, including your desires. Why do you even want to grow? If you don't do that, it's really hard to come up with any type of an improvement roadmap. And again, that's where we always, a place where we start quite a bit is just by evaluating this. So let's unpack these a little bit more, Suno, and let's go through each stage and how you see that showing up as a contractor is moving through different stages of growth.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? When you start with that stage one, right, and you've got the kind of half a dozen people, um, you feel very emerging all the time, right? Because
Yeah, right.
you're at the end of the tailgate, you're kind of popping your head up, going, "Hey, there's somebody over there that looks like they've got a job going on that I could go bid." So the emerging is always kind of very, very tight, same people doing things, kind of head down, butt up, trying to get the work done. Um, but it's funny because as that leader becomes more comfortable there and starts to look at expanding, going, I don't need to do all the work. I can hire a few more. Uh, then they may be moving up into that kind of between that level one, level two. Um, and the rest of their team may or may not be with them. If the rest of the team is not with them because they just don't see it yet, that's where you've got that manager, that leader kind of moving up beyond the rest of the group. So that literally shows the hollow there. So you might have gone from 6 to 7 or 8 people, but you still don't really have that second level of trusted leadership, right? When you start to find maybe it's a foreman or you hire somebody else in, and now you've got yourself as that leader, you've got one other person that you can trust to go out and take their pickup over here and build some work, and you're building over here, so now you've got those 15 people. You've really kind of done that scaling from that group one or that stage one of growth to that stage two of growth, but thinking that that's where you're going to be forever um, is certainly, well, if that's where you want to be forever, that's great. But if you think that's going to get you to where you want to be next, you really have to realize that this is going to come back and you're going to end up doing it in certain stages again, whether that's as you move into that stage two, and then all of a sudden everyone again has their head down doing all the work. Now you go back to really being that emerging contractor because you're not looking up, you're not moving along like that. So you really do go through the emerging, hollow, and ready at most of these stages. But when you get to that stage, kind of stage four, stage 3 or 4 is when it really changes and really starts to influence again a lot of your systems, a lot of your equipment, a lot of where, how many more leaders do I need, what does my organizational structure look like to be able to do this. So being ready at any one time does not mean that you're ready at all times. You will
Right.
flow in and out of emerging and hollow, certainly hollow frequently as you move in and get to be comfortable at one of the stages. You may have somebody in your second tier management that says, hey, I need bigger growth and I'm going to go somewhere else. So people leaving can cause that hollowness as well, and a leader then
Yeah.
having to kind of move back down and work in another role or work in 2 roles again can make it feel like it's that emerging contractor again because you got your head down trying to work in the business instead of on the business.
So
So
it's interesting, and this also occurs. I was just thinking about a conversation last night. It occurs within a business as well, and this was an example. So project he's in a project executive type of role where overseeing a market. It's a high growth market, so it's a very rapidly growing market, which creates its own problems because it creates a shortage of talent, but it also creates a lot of revenue opportunities. And um and it's one thing if you're within a stage of growth and your range is from the high side of that, as a leader, to your teams at the lower side of that, we're on emerging. That's one challenge that you run through. It's a completely different challenge if both the business's revenue and the gap between the leadership is a level apart. And we now, and this is from a business standpoint, or even running a particular market, we've seen, that gap, usually it doesn't stretch more than 2 levels apart, but it can stretch quite a bit. And what ends up happening is you concentrate all the decision rights and everything all to that central person. And so everything kind of crosses that person's desk. So on one hand, the financial performance usually is really, really good because that person gets really good at making decisions. They have total situational awareness. They are quick at making those decisions. So they're not only good at it, but they're very quick at it. And the financial performance of the organization is super, super good. The problem is that it's not sustainable because that person is on a hamster wheel and just moving. So it's totally okay to be hollow. Like you said, it's just a matter of how hollow are you and what's your strategy to become less hollow. We kind of look at that. One of our teammates did a lot of rock climbing, and it was kind of neat. It's almost like that person that's the lead climber somebody has to be the lead climber. It's the strongest climber is the one that climbs up. They climb up 10 or 15 feet above, maybe 20 feet above the other person. The person below and the team below are anchoring them in so that if they fall, they're there to catch them, so to speak, with the safety rope. But that fall is going to hurt if they fall, even with the team catching them. But once they climb up that 15, 20 feet above, they set in some security, another anchor point, another safety line, and then the rest of the team comes up to that level, and then they repeat the process and they continue climbing. And so that it's a totally normal process to go from emerging to hollow. But if you, just like in rock climbing, if you climb too far up, that fall is going to hurt. Falling 15, 20 feet and landing on a harness hurts really bad. Falling 40 or 50 feet is going to cause an injury. So it's so funny because he called it. This is yesterday on my way home phone call, and he goes, Dave, he's like, I'm got everything's pretty good, but he's like, I'm totally stressed out. I've made a list of everything. He's a really good manager. I made a list of everything that I've got to do. I'm 14 months behind I'm letting my team down. And I'm like, oh, you're only 14 months behind. That sounds like an easy day. You should go talk to the president of the company, see how behind he is. So there's always a point that you're going to be hollow, and that distance, will grow as you grow organization, but you never want to let it grow more than a level of gap in between. And if it is a full level of stage of growth in between, whether that's within a market or the company as a whole, make sure that you know that there's a really, really good reason for that, and you have a plan for it. It might be in this case, it's a rapid growth market. We know it's going to, the backlog and everything's going to tail off at a certain point in time, and he will have a chance to go catch up and bring the team up there. But if you keep running at that pace, you're taking away resiliency of the organization, sustainability. You will pay the price sooner or later. We see this all the time, right?
Yep, that's exactly true. Which is why so many organizations, when they've got this internally, right, in whether it's new market, new geography, whatever they're doing, and they're using kind of this, whether they know it or not, they're using kind of this emerging hollow loop to do that. Many of them that really understand it start grabbing people from some of the other markets and areas and putting them together because they've already been through this and they've seen it, so they can tell where those gaps are and start to move people in. That whole cross training and making sure that people really do understand what each other is doing, because you can only run so fast for so long before the whole thing collapses, and you really do have to have an eye toward the people, an eye toward a long-term strategy, how you want to get there, and how you, again, going back to the whole comfortable capabilities, when were people comfortable doing it, and gaining for that, right? Aiming for when do you get to comfortable and not running people into the ground to do it.
So that brings us, I think, to from an overview standpoint of that first stage of what are the stages of growth. I'm kind of like where we're at. I think that can bring it to a conclusion. for some resources, we have a one-page overview of what some of these different stages look like, the inflection points, and a self-evaluation tool with a series of questions. It'll take a while to work through all the questions, but it can be really helpful in helping you understand just where you're at. And there's directions don't matter if you don't know where you're at and where you're going. Directions that are totally meaningless. So when the self-evaluation tool is always a great starting point. Definitely send an email, contact us, and we'll shoot over these resources. But coming up next, I am super interested. One of our next coffee conversations. So we'll talk through the contractor business model, and scoreboard, kind of a diagrammatical way of looking at the business and all the major components to help break down, like, okay, we're at a growth inflection point, or we're having some struggles. About where are we having those struggles? We'll break down the talent value stream, which is a subset of the overall contractor's business model, but an incredibly important one for, especially in today's environment, for talent. And then, lastly, we'll talk through effective role transitions, everything from entry level through retirement masterpiece. Which, so the other cool thing about you, that I love, is after decades in management, then you got your master's in psychology, because you realized, like, beyond the systems and the checklist and the structure and the strategy, guess it all comes down to human psychology. What are you working on now? I'm gonna have to call you Dr. Sue pretty soon, right?
Yeah, well, I am working on my doctorate in organizational psychology, and it's interesting because my doctorate is all about, and I'm going to get the official name wrong because it keeps changing. A doctorate process is a process, but it is all about the basically the knowledge transfer from uh, the current employees, or the nearing retirement and high expertise employees, as they're leaving the organization. uh, what is the transition planning, or do organizations in construction have transition planning on how to transition those high expertise and nearing retirement employees out, and still get the mentorship and the knowledge transfer, and how can you use those people to fill gaps for um, some of that, just like we're talking, right? The demographics aren't really going to change until 2030. How can we use that as an official kind of offboarding, as opposed to, here's the cliff and your gold watch, now go away. Here's an actual offboarding process that can be utilized. And frankly, what we're finding out now is, um, we'd love to know a lot of this stuff, just not a lot of people do much of it on a deliberate basis. So more to come. I may have to reach out to some people for being part of a focus group and some interviews. So that'll be good. It'll be fun.
So yeah, that piece on role transitions, so all the way from entry level through exiting and designing your perfect retirement masterpiece, and including how to stay engaged, or how companies can go keep somebody engaged. I heard this term come up yesterday, and I'd never heard the term before. It made total sense. Somebody called it silver mining. Have you heard that?
Well, I've heard of the silver tsunami, right, where they're all leaving. But silver mining makes a lot of sense. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of talent that can be managed, utilized for everybody's benefit, right? The industry, individual companies, and the person, right, looking for that retirement masterpiece.
It was interesting because I mean, I guess a lot of people think about it like, okay, well, I got my last check, bye, and I'm off doing this thing, and it was just an interesting discussion, because this company did have a lot of people, a lot of long-term employees, a lot of people that are very loyal, and
Yeah.
that you see, and they're going, while we're going through a growth spurt, sure would be nice, let's go get a few of those people in here just to train and mentor, just 2 or 3 days a week, and that helps create that retirement masterpiece and value for them. I know you've been masterful in helping some of our clients think about, what do they want to do post succession. Okay, great, you sold your company, you're exiting, what do you want to do next? And that's been awesome. So those are the things that are coming up in future discussions. But that's it for today. So let's get on with the rest of our day.
All right. All right. Thanks, David. We will talk soon.
All right. See you, ma'am.
Building projects requires technical expertise and resources. Building a construction business is about developing and aligning those capabilities with customers. We exist to help contractors build stronger businesses for the next generation. From startup to sustainability, contractors grow through 6 distinct stages. Each stage of growth requires a different leadership focus, strategies, systems, and structure. Our goal is to broadly share information that helps contractors navigate each stage. Any resources discussed are available on our website at dbmteam.com.